Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to TheRebel.media. My name's Andrew Lawton, and you are listening to Lawton Online. And, oh my goodness, there is a lot to talk about today. It's going to be a pretty jam-packed show, and, you know, throughout the week, the way it works is I generally keep a mental note of things that I want to talk about. Sometimes I'll have read an article, and other times I'll have done a segment on my radio show and thought, hey, you know, I want to talk about that on The Rebel too. Other times I see, you know, this is something that would only be good for The Rebel. That's the really fun stuff too, I'm not going to lie. And I'll keep track of it, and, you know, eventually by the time it comes to, you know, record the show, I've got a lot to talk about, or I'll try to piece things together, or sometimes, you know, you really have to scrape. But that hasn't happened yet, thankfully. But what's interesting is that this show today, the one that you're listening to right now, has developed somewhat of a theme that was unintentional. But the more I thought about it, the more I was thinking, or initially, oh my goodness, I got to do that next week, I guess, and do this, you know, another week because I can't have it all sounding the same. But I wanted to instead just go with it. I mean, this is going to be a show that is unintentionally themed, but the common thread that I think connects most of the topics is one that's very similar in other shows as well, and it's that of rights. Political correctness, yes, but to a broader extent, rights is the main topic I want to cover today with all the issues that we go through. Your right to have free speech, your right to have your own business, your right to claim that other things that you think are rights that aren't actually are. That falls under free speech. And then we get into the mythical rights, the human rights, like the right to do this, the right to do that. And more importantly, the question of what happens when rights conflict with each other. Where does that hierarchy lie? Going to be talking later on in the show about a case on a Canadian airline porter this week that I found to be quite interesting, about an Orthodox Jewish man that didn't want to sit beside a female passenger, so now she's demanding an apology for Porter accommodating him. Also going to talk later on about the right for women to go topless. As a man, that's a right I wholeheartedly support, but sometimes people get a little bit too militant about it and, you know, too feministy. And lots more stuff coming up as well. I wanted to begin, though, talking about one of the big announcements this week in U.S. news, believe it or not, and that's the decision by Boy Scouts of America that they are continuing along with what is happening all across the U.S., which is easing up on policies as they pertain to homosexuality. Now, you may remember a year and a bit ago, Boy Scouts of America finally lifted its ban on gay members, on gay scouts, and there was a lot of lobbying, and has been up until this past week, for Boy Scouts of America to continue and lighten up yet again the policies and rules they have on leaders and staff members, where there still is, nationally anyway, for the organization, a ban on gay members staff-wise. Now, I've got to clear something up here as well. I mean, we're looking at only a couple of weeks past when the Supreme Court in the United States ruled that same-sex marriage was acceptable, or at least that the bans on it weren't. And now it's like Boy Scouts of America is now kind of like, all right, well, I guess, yeah, we can change it too. I mean, there's really not much significance in their decision now in light of all the other changes that the gay rights movement in the U.S. has seen. Now, a lot of people have asked me where I stand on the issue of same-sex marriage, the issue of homosexuality in any particular environment, whether it's a workplace or a military or apparently Boy Scouts of America. And I want to make very clear that I am, as a Christian conservative, conflicted on a lot of occasions about which should trump which, about, you know, my conservatism politically and my Christianity identity-wise. And I can think of no better word to describe me than a conservatarian. I mean, I don't associate with libertarians. I don't associate, in some cases, with conservatives. I mean, I do. I associate with them, but oftentimes they try to disown me when they hear about my libertarian tendencies. Look, I believe as an individual in Christian values. I believe that people should embrace that faith because I think it's correct. I don't believe the state should be the arbiter of that. I don't believe that the government should be the ones that enforce it. So any policy based on religious values from the government, I'm going to oppose. Any policy, any law that is based off of anything other than the ideas of liberty taking precedence, I am going to oppose. So I look at these situations, I mean, when some organization is doing something that someone else says is discriminatory in a very consistent way, which is, look, is the government blocking any expression of freedom, expression of assembly, expression of religion, et cetera, et cetera? If it is, then I've got a problem with it. If not, it's not something that I believe should be dealt with governmentally. I may have a personal problem. I may have a moral problem. I've got to be honest, I don't quite understand why it was necessary to ban gay leaders from Boy Scouts in the first place. I don't really get it. I think that seems to be a holdover from a time when attitudes on that issue were a lot different than they are today. But by the same token, I also think we need to recognize that the Boy Scouts have done something which I think is probably their best decision here. They're ending the nationwide ban, but they're allowing the individual units, especially those, or specifically, I should say, those connected to churches, to still maintain whatever policies they feel they have to in order to allow their unit to run more fluidly. So the reality now, the change in position has been pretty well summed up by Michael Harrison. This is a businessman who led and lobbied for the change and a leader in Orange County, California himself. He said, quote, "There are differences of opinion, and we need to be respectful of them. It doesn't mean the Mormons have to pick a gay scoutmaster, but please don't tell the Unitarians they can't." And this is, in all honesty, how I believe marriage should be in the U.S. and Canada as well. Don't make the Catholic Church give gay marriages. Don't tell the United Church that they can't. Pretty simple. Everyone wins. Everyone writes. Everyone has their rights and everyone preserves and protects them. The problem is when you have someone trying to impose an agenda the other way that we get into difficulties here. And this is what we've seen with the gay rights movement. You know, there was a time when the Christian right was oppressing the gay community and the state was allowing this. And now the pendulum has swung in the other direction where the gay community is trying to impose its will and its agenda on the rest of the country. And I'm not talking about a gay agenda by being allowed to get married or being allowed to adopt a child. I'm talking about a gay agenda which is, you know, taking the baker to court for not baking a wedding cake. The issue that came out in the days following the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage in the U.S., that decision saying that all of a sudden the not-for-profit status of churches that don't issue gay marriages could be threatened. Several reports pointing that out. So I find that to be an imposition of an agenda no different than when the alternative was true and gays were being oppressed at the hands of religious politicians. I believe that religious liberty and sexual freedoms need to exist side by side. You need to have both. And if one's rights are being discriminated against, and note that I'm using the air quotes around that, by a private business, well, tough luck. Boycott the business, threaten the business with further boycott. Social media is your friend. We all know that's used as a first line of defense. Talk to people, shame them, whatever you want. I mean, I don't care. That all falls under free speech, as irrational as I think it is sometimes. But don't expect someone else to come in and hold your hand and tell them that they have to treat you in a different way than they are. I have a right to exist. I have a right to life. I have a right to express my life and my beliefs the way I want. No one is forced to accept me. I do not have a right to be accepted by other people for anything. For being white, for being fat, for being a radio broadcaster. No one has to like that. If I were skinny, black, gay, crippled, doesn't matter. I used to be crippled, and lots of people accepted me. I'm not anymore, which means I've also lost the ability to use the word crippled, unfortunately. But the reality is I just don't care about these micro issues that people insist on making much larger than they actually are. And we'll be talking about that in a couple of other examples later on. I mean, to keep this on the Boy Scouts example here, I don't think anyone in Boy Scouts loses if you're in a unit that, does not want gay leaders compared to another unit that does. I think as long as your unit is on board with what you want, with the values that you want for yourselves, no one else can really tell you you're wrong. People can tell you you're wrong. I should clarify. That doesn't mean that they have any power over you just because they think that. And I think that is a very reasonable dividing line here. You know, I spoke about this on my show earlier this week when the decision was made. And one of the questions that some people pointed out is they say, just discrimination is just wrong. It is. And yeah, absolutely. Discrimination is wrong. But everyone discriminates. I mean, discrimination is such a broad word if you really think about it. I mean, discrimination is something that takes place every time we choose a preference for one thing over another. I mean, arguably, we're discriminating against homosexuality every time you and kiss someone of the opposite sex. So let's recognize here that discrimination is very different if we break it down to just the word itself than fundamental bigotry. Fundamentally racist people or fundamentally homophobic people. And these are not people that have their own beliefs and values. These are people that genuinely believe someone is a lesser person because of whatever identity group it is that they dislike. Whether it's a sexual minority, a racial minority, a religious minority, a disability, so on and so forth. The list is endless. These are genuinely bigoted things. And I don't know if I've ever truly seen a business that has said, we're not serving so-and-so out of a place of bigotry. I mean, we've seen the bed and breakfast that won't serve the gay couple. And it's always these, older Christian couples whose lives are dragged through the mud, whose businesses are lost because of this. And what I find hilarious is that no one talks about the fact that these people also would have turned down an unmarried straight couple. Same as, Trinity Western University. No one cared about the fact that straight couples were forbidden from having sex if they went there. Everyone just liked focusing on the homosexuality component. And what was funny about the Trinity Western cases, I remember talking about this. I talked about it on this podcast. I also talked about it on my radio show. And I got one email, and I can't remember from which one it was, from someone saying, oh, well, that's disingenuous, that the only reason you're talking about adultery and you're talking about the infidelity aspect and you're talking about the sex outside of marriage aspect is because you're trying to deflect that this is a gay issue. No, I was talking about it all because it was true. But you know what? The truth is no defense now. The truth, despite, Glenn Beck's accurate assertion that the truth has no agenda, is apparently to some people enacting an agenda. So, when we look at the Boy Scouts here, I don't feel that they are doing anything wrong. In fact, I think they've made the best PR move here at all. They're not going to have a mass exodus of members that are from areas where homosexuality is less than acceptable or is less accepted, because those groups still get to hold on to their beliefs. And other groups that have evolved alongside, I think, a lot of the United States and the Western world on the issue, or what I see as an evolution anyway, because I really don't see why it matters if you have a gay scout leader. Those people are now able to behave according to their beliefs and values as well. But it's been the response to this that says they've made a wrong decision because they should have gone even further, that I find to be disgusting. This, again, pendulum theory that no, they need to outright celebrate and they need to outright take down anyone in their organization that doesn't want a homosexual leader, etc. And all of this concern is coming from people that I would venture a guess to say aren't even a member. All these people who aren't in Scouts, don't have kids in Scouts, are probably not interested in being leaders anyway, but they've seen it's an issue, they've seen they can talk about it, they've seen they can weigh in on this and exact their agenda, which is exactly what it is. And then they do. It's the same as the people boycotting Chick-fil-A who have never had a chicken sandwich in their lives. The people calling for whatever group to apologize, even though they were never going to be a fan of the group anyway, and never were. And it gets really tiring in media sometimes. It does. I mean, it gets very exhausting when you see the same charade taking place time after time after time. And you can't really do anything about it because this is where culture has devolved to such a place that it's more important now for one group to be happy than for all groups to have the right to be free. That's the balancing act. It's now important for one group to have no rights and for another to be happy instead of two groups having all of their rights, but not necessarily having happiness guaranteed. You know, it's the same as that microaggression culture. Feelings trump reality. Feelings trump whatever else in the world is contributing to these things that we know as truth and fact and all of these other novel concepts that seem to be quite far from, well, anywhere in the public discourse right now, in academia, media, etc. The list goes on and on and on. So I mean, then there's the obvious question, what's the answer to it? And I wish I could say I had an answer, and if I did, I wouldn't give it to you in the first segment. I'm going to make you listen through to the end of the show here, but I can tell you what some of the answers are. I don't think there's one magic bullet solution here. But I think a big part of this has to come from people refusing to submit to it. People standing up for what they believe. People fighting for what they believe. I think it also has to come, from my eyes anyway, and this, I mean, goes back to the ideology that I explained a little bit earlier on in the segment that I hold, which is to look at things through the lens of liberty. I think we need to recognize where our losing battles are as conservatives. And the fact is, we no longer win arguments by quoting Bible verses. I would venture, I guess, to say that it would be fair now to assume that conservatives no longer even win over policies through elections. I mean, look at Stephen Harper right now. I mean, he's the most conservative prime minister in Canada we've seen in quite a while, and how much do we really have to show for it? Sure, we've had some very good success on the foreign relations front. We've had, I think, pretty good fiscal management. I mean, despite, recession 2.0 coming about now. But for the most part, he's governed as a centrist. He's governed as a centrist, and that's what they all do. That's what the Liberals do. That's what the Conservatives do. That's what the PCs did. So I don't blame Stephen Harper for this, but the problem is we need to do what the left has been doing. And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and I may have even touched on it last week as well. We need to start trying to win over the culture war. Because that's where we're losing. And that's where the left gets to control the narrative in so many different ways because of the left's proponents to governing things like speech, because of the left's focus on agendas rather than policies, rather than platforms. And when we look at the big changes, anyway, that we've seen, the big cultural battles, the big moral battles, the big moral questions, so many of these things have been accomplished for the left, not because they passed laws in government, although that certainly has played into effect, but no, because they've won the culture battle. They've manipulated the culture. They've turned, really, the gay movement into one about Broadway musicals rather than one about political action, which is what it is. And I'm not talking about gay people. I'm talking about the actual gay movement, the groups that are basically lobbying hard for things like, Boy Scouts of America being banned and branded as homophobic and so on and so forth. And it's funny because, I mean, so many people I know that speak out against this George Orwell-style stuff have, I think anyway, really hit the nail on the head when they say that this has nothing to do with sexual orientation. It has to do with that wing using its influence to accomplish stuff that it agrees with politically anyway. And that's why I think gay conservatives are among the biggest and most outspoken opponents of a lot of these changes. I mean, you get people like Dr. Roy Epen that have spoken out, and Fred Litwin from Free Thinking Films, and the list goes on about, prominent gay conservatives that have been basically exiled from the gay community because of their affiliation with the conservative community. And, sexual orientation, if it's something you're born with, why should that then matter what political view you have? Hey, it does. I don't make the rules. I've just had to be the one observing the game for however many years it's been going on now. So, I mean, to bring this back to my original point here, look, I mean, Boy Scouts of America, I think, has made a decision that is one that comes into the 21st century in so many ways. But the problem is now that there are some that have no stake in it, no vested interest in it, that say it's not enough. You are the ones, if you're Boy Scouts of America and you run the show or you're a member of that organization, you are the one that has to be able to make a decision that you can sleep with at night, not these other people. And that goes for so many of the other issues that we see in society that I try to cover on this show, and a couple of them we'll have for you coming up when we return. More Lawton Online in just a couple of moments here on TheRebel.media, talking about the 2 Vancouver Hookah Lounge owners that aren't giving in to the nanny state when we come back, and lots more here on Lawton Online. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
He's unapologetic, unwavering, and unafraid to take on the left's sacred cows. He's Andrew Lawton, and you're listening to Lawton Online on TheRebel.media.
Welcome back to Lawton Online. Okay, so I got to make a little bit of a confession here before we proceed with the show. This segment is going to make me sound like a prude. It is, and you know what? I almost got rid of it because I'm like, oh, people will make fun of me, but I don't care, so it's okay. I've never smoked pot in my life. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, and I've never smoked shisha or hookah in my life. I've had, the odd cigar before. I've smoked meats before. But I'm not sure that counts in terms of understanding smoking. So apart from the odd cigar, I've never smoked anything in my life. Now, I have heard that this big, craze in the last few years that has come to North America has been this hookah craze. And pardon me as I probably butcher the explanation of how hookah works. As I understand it, there is some form of basin of water that is used to vaporize and smoke a flavored substance, which traditionally was like tobacco mixed with fruits and other stuff like that. And you can get like coconut flavor and, cherry flavor and all that sort of stuff. But now it's not even tobacco. Now they just use some herbal substance of sorts, and people sit around and they listen to music and they just chat and they smoke this stuff out of this big communal pipe. I would not really want to touch my mouth to something that other people had been doing, but you know what? Who am I to judge? If it works for Sandra Fluke, you can put your mouth on anything, I guess. It works for people that go to hookah lounges. Now, the problem is that these are all the rage now, and even though most places have indoor smoking bans, these things have traditionally been exempt. The reason is, first off, they weren't covered in the initial legislation because they weren't a thing in Ontario and other parts of Canada back then. Though they've been, part of Middle Eastern culture for quite a while, they have only relatively recently become something that Western people love to embrace. The second thing has been because there is no tobacco in them. There's no nicotine in them. There is no harmful byproduct of these things. It's basically like you are just inhaling the aroma from when you're cooking something. Now, the problem is that smoking is smoking. And numerous reports, including Health Canada and the CDC, have said that when you're smoking hookah or smoking a cigarette or smoking marijuana, the act of smoking itself is one of the problematic components of it. So it's not what you're smoking, but it's the actual reality of smoke coming into your body. And if that's the case, okay, fair point. But still, there's nothing that comes from secondhand hookah smoke that's ever been definitively proven. And more importantly, the places that sell these things are oftentimes places marketing themselves specifically as hookah lounges. So it's not even like you and your family were out at Boston Pizza and your meal was ruined because the guy in the smoking section across the booth was smoking a cigarette while you were dining there. the way it used to be when, the smoking section and non-smoking sections of restaurants were really all sort of one and the same thing. It was all just one place. In any case, the thing that I think most people need to keep in mind here is that if you don't want to smoke hookah, you're probably not going to go to a place that does it. Well, Vancouver has done what BC does best over on the left coast of Canada, which is really try to block this from happening in public. It's not enough that Vancouver has among the most strict smoking laws in Canada. Ontario is certainly up there, though, especially with new changes made in the last few months by the Liberal government here. But Vancouver, in fact, is only one of a small number of cities, but a growing number, that prohibit smoking the non-tobacco hookah, so herbal shisha it's called. Now, what I find to be hilarious about this is that even Toronto is looking at this, but Toronto has a pretty big multicultural population. I mean, they're alienating a lot of people, especially since this is something that Middle Eastern people see as more than a novelty, but actually a part of their culture. And it's actually two Middle Eastern men that are really becoming the superstars in my eyes in Vancouver on this. One person is Hameed Mohammadi, and he owns the Persian Tea House. Another person is Abbas Abdiana of Awaz Hookah House. Now, they were charged in 2009 in Vancouver for violating the city's health bylaw by allowing the smoking and burning of substances in commercial establishments. Now, 1 month after they lost their appeal, they're still not giving in. Now, this has been going on for quite a number of years, and the indoor smoking law in Vancouver has actually expanded even further to include more places like them, places where you are just giving your customers this herbal stuff. But they're not stopping. They are not giving up. And you know what? I have to say good on them. I don't necessarily buy that they should get an exemption for one of the reasons they've given, which is that this is important to their religion. So they said that because it's important to Islam, it would be discriminatory against people of different faiths. No, I approach this from a business rights perspective. You're a business owner. It's not like you're a shawarma hut that happens to serve hookah. I mean, you're a hookah lounge. Like, if you take the hookah out of the lounge, you're really just a room. And I'm not sure people are going to go out and spend money at a room that really can't give people all that much above and beyond, a place to sit. Now, so the defense, I mean, they made their case that, well, because this is a central way of Muslim life, it's infringing on their cultural rights. The city is saying that, well, even non-tobacco hookah has health risks, and, other people could be harmed and have heart attacks and cancer, and secondhand smoke can cause respiratory problems, etc. And unfortunately, not only the trial judges, but also the appeal judges agreed with this. Now, the funny thing that has happened now is they're trying to find another way to get around it. They're not closing. They say they're going to attach a vaporizer attachment to the hookah pipes that will heat the shisha instead of charcoal. So it won't actually be smoke, but vapor. And they feel this will be in compliance with the bylaw. The city says, well, even using vaping and e-cigarettes is also wrong, because e-cigarettes, despite having no proven harmful side effects from being in the vicinity of them, are apparently also the target of many a municipality in Canada, including Vancouver. But you know what? I have to give a lot of credit to Mr. Mohammadi on this one, who said, quote, if there's one hookah cafe open in Canada, I will stay open. If everyone closes, I close. Well, he will be the last one standing. And he should be. Some of the biggest cities in the country, Toronto, Montreal, Winnipeg, Calgary, Ottawa, Edmonton, still allow this. There are 6 businesses in Toronto that offer hookah use. And it's all legal. And you know what? If I weren't someone who wanted to be around it, which I'm not, I would make this very novel decision to simply not go there. And I don't understand why that is supposed to be such a difficult concept for so many people. We've all heard of NIMBYism, this, not in my backyard approach. But I honestly think that is a lesson we can apply to this here. If you don't want it to happen in your backyard, great. Don't let it happen in your backyard. But otherwise, if I am going to someone else's backyard, I'm not going to tell them how to run the show there. I'm not going to go to a hookah restaurant that's been there for 15, 16 years or something and say, hey, this is not your place to do. This is not your right. This is not your right to sell this service that clearly people like, which is why they keep coming out to your business. So what's the alternative? I mean, what's the alternative? Are we going to have people starting to run these hookah businesses out of their homes? Because I'm sure the government would find that a lot more objectionable, because then you need to get a business license. And, once you get a business license, all of a sudden you're a commercial establishment. So the only places these people can go are public places. You're not even allowed to do it outside in a lot of cases, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but certainly amusing nonetheless when we see how city bylaws tend to start cannibalizing themselves and leaving themselves open for a lot of very conflicting challenges. But it's funny because I'm remembering that famous quote that so many of you will know. And I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. It was Pastor Martin something, Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. We could really, and not to obviously do anything harmful to the legacy of Pastor Niemöller, but we could really apply that in the modern day. I mean, first they came for the cigarette smokers, and I wasn't one, so I didn't care. And then they came for the hookah smokers, and I didn't complain because I wasn't one of them. And then they came for the vapors, and I wasn't a vapor. Like, before you know it, we're going to have basically nothing left that you can put into your body but a glass of water and a kale salad. I mean, this is really the direction the government's going right now. From, calorie counts on menus in Ontario to BC banning hookah. If the government's basically making this law for one of two reasons: number one, control, which it has; number two, because they're worried about people making unhealthy decisions for themselves, well, why not shut down anything else where someone could get hurt? Why not shut down a rock climbing place where someone might fall and, hurt a baby toe? Why not shut down McDonald's where someone might, get a bit fat if they go and get a Big Mac? Because then we're faced with the question that government doesn't want people to make choices for themselves. And it's funny because, for all the left talks about it being the fair and compassionate political ideology, it's kind of interesting how it's an entire ideology rooted in apparently believing that people are too stupid to make decisions for themselves. Now, I happen to believe some people are too stupid to make decisions for themselves, but I also think we also have to let, natural selection take hold of things sometimes. When push comes to shove, as I mentioned, this is obviously going to be an area where we need to see people able to look at government and say, wow, I'm glad government took a step back because I need to make this choice about myself. I need to make this choice for myself. But not only is that a novel idea for some people, that's a downright offensive idea for some people. How dare you claim that you know what's best for people is my question. Their question is, how dare you claim that people know what's best and government doesn't? That, to me, is the ultimate offense to a leftist. And, the e-cigarettes one is laughable because e-cigarettes, and again, I've never touched one of them. I've never vaped in my life. I have friends who vape and who have vaped around me and around whom I've felt, inhaled, smelt absolutely nothing. So someone could literally vape 6 inches from me and it wouldn't bother me. So I think that speaks to the fact that they are, in fact, very different than cigarettes. The other part of it, though, is that the science is not yet settled on vaping like it is on cigarette smoking. Now, I think smoking cigarettes is unhealthy. I think most smokers know it's unhealthy, but I also think it's your right to make unhealthy decisions. When we look at vaping, the science has not been settled. Health Canada doesn't have a definitive policy on it. The Ontario Ministry of Health has been the one that's saying that until we know for sure it's safe, we should ban it and restrict it and regulate it and this and that and make sure that kids don't get it. And then the Alberta government is trying to ban menthol cigarettes, but not real cigarettes. But the fact is, and we need to take a little step back here. Maybe a big step back. Why are we banning things until we learn more about them? Why don't we say, all right, find the information, and then when we learn more about it, we can start deciding from a public policy perspective if we have enough justification and enough grounds to make a decision. to make a change, to make a law, to make a policy, to ban it, to regulate it, to restrict it, to tax it, to subsidize it, to this, to this, to this, to that, and so on and so forth, and a partridge in a pear tree, because that's not how government operates. It's all about control. Nothing to do with public safety, nothing to do with what's healthy for you and I, everything to do with what power government wants to exert over us. And I so don't want to sound like Alex Jones right now. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just progressivism at work. I mean, the fact that the government, which has the most hypocritical policy when you look at smoking, telling people not to do it, making it difficult to do it, telling you all the places you can't do it, but still taking billions of dollars for it, and the fact that government has the most to gain from people not quitting smoking, which is what e-cigarettes are actually proven to help people do. So I find it very suspect that government has now made it as easy to smoke a cigarette, which is not very easy, as it is to smoke an e-cigarette. And this is what Ontario's doing. This is what other cities are doing. Toronto was ahead of the curve on this anyway. And it's really funny because, well, it's not funny, but it's certainly interesting. Because one of the biggest benefits, and I asked a vapor friend of mine about this, and I said, why smoke an e-cigarette? And she said, I like that I can smoke it anywhere. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, I like that, whereas if it's the winter time and I'm in, some event, I don't have to go downstairs, put on a coat, put on my boots, go outside, have a 7-minute cigarette break. I can just, puff an e-cigarette once and I'm good for a little while. And it's true. And I've seen people do it very discreetly. I don't particularly care for trying one of them. It's not my thing, but as someone who doesn't actually like the smell of cigarette smoke that much, I find it kind of interesting that I can be around them and literally not care, and in fact not even notice unless I'm looking right at them. And hookah is very different than e-cigarettes, but it falls into the same category of government just trying to ban something for the sake of banning it. So look, I may not agree with why Mr. Mohammadi and Mr. Abdiana think it's so important to have hookah lounges around. It's not significant to my culture, to my religion, but I respect that it is to theirs. And more importantly, I respect that it's important to their bottom line, to their livelihood, that the government wants to brazenly and shamelessly take away from them, all in the name of health and wellness. We got to take a break here. When we come back, more Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. Stay with us, friends. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
Hey, we are back on Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. Oh, my goodness. So I've never flown Porter Airlines. I've heard good things about it. I don't live in Toronto, and obviously if you're not living in Toronto, I'm not sure the appeal of Porter is really there. Certainly not in London, Ontario. The driving to downtown Toronto to get on a plane does not seem to be the most fun, but if you're there and if you're in the city, that's fine. I've heard good things about it. I've heard the service is phenomenal. Yet it's precisely that very service that is leading one Halifax woman to complain and demand an apology, because this is what you do when you're outraged. You demand an apology from Porter Airlines for the way she says she was treated on a flight. Now, let me try to set the stage for you. Her name is Christine Flynn. She's 31 years old, and she was recently on a flight Monday morning from Newark, New Jersey to Toronto Island. The flight was supposed to take off early Monday morning. She was on the flight as she was sitting down in her seat, nicely situated. An ultra-Orthodox Jewish man approached her. Apparently, he was not fluent in English. He, according to her, came down the aisle, looked at her, and then turned to the gentleman across the aisle and said, "Change." She was confused at first, wondering why he was speaking to the other passenger and gesturing towards her. She said he didn't speak to her directly. But she said somehow, in light of not hearing what he was saying, she got the sense that he didn't want to sit next to her because she was a woman. She said if he had told her directly, she might have accommodated. She said language might have been a factor. But she says he refused to make eye contact. She said he could have made a plan. He could have put in a request. She said she felt like less of a person because of her gender. She said the whole incident was appalling. Well, enter the flight attendant who probably wishes she had stayed in bed and called in sick that day. The stewardess approached, asked if there was a problem. Christine Flynn said, quote, "This man is refusing to sit next to me because I'm a woman." And then another person had said, well, I'll move with her, with Christine. The flight attendant said, okay, this guy's offering to move. Asked Christine, would you be willing to move? The woman said no. So then what happened is the flight attendant asked someone else if he'd be interested in moving, and he did, switch places with the actual Jewish man. He got his wish. He got to sit somewhere else, not next to a woman. Christine got her wish. She got to keep her seat. Everyone's happy. The plane took off. We can all sail into the sunset, right? Well, wrong. Because it never works that way. It doesn't matter if the solution was met with the least disruption possible. What matters is that, there has been an alleged human rights infraction that takes place here. So we must get involved and someone must apologize. Someone must write a strongly worded letter. Someone must, now sing like a John Lennon song, because otherwise there's going to be no way we will conceivably be able to get over this, right? Well, it appears to look that way. The fact is, as I understand it, and this has been verified by a spokesperson for Porter Airlines, it looks like the flight was pretty full. What the spokesman, Brad Chikiro, said is that, quote, the flight attendant did her best to manage the situation as efficiently and reasonably as possible in order to avoid an unnecessary delay, unquote. Well, that person just sounds like a monster. Just sounds like an absolute monster. How dare she try to deal with things in a suitable and reasonable and quick and prompt way? He says their policy is that they try to accommodate seating preferences as best as they can. Usually that is families not wanting to sit, or families, that was a Freudian slip, families wanting to sit near each other, or a passenger wanting a window versus an aisle seat. He says religious preferences are very rarely a factor, but clearly here they are. And I don't think I'm out of line here to suggest that the outrage would probably be non-existent if it were a devout Muslim man on the plane, because we all know that this is a group that you can't criticize, you can't call sexist, etc. Let's face the fact that most people, regardless of religion, are I'm going to say, pretty indifferent to sitting beside women, men, etc. There isn't really an issue there. Now, there was that one controversy a couple of months ago that I was talking about on this show, the high school soccer team that basically forfeited because the male players didn't want to play against female players, although that one was really interesting because they only seemed to care about it once it was at halftime and they were already losing, but I digress. No, this seems like something where a woman is trying to be a whiner. I mean, she's not trying. She frankly is at that quite naturally. She doesn't like that someone asked her to move. She said no, they moved on. And what do you know? They found a way to make it work. So I don't, from someone who's worked in retail before, as someone who's worked in the service industry, where you want to try to mitigate whatever potential disaster is in front of you, I don't know what the airline could have done differently here. I don't know what they could have done any differently, considering the fact that they avoided a massive flare-up, they avoided outrage, they avoided the plane staying on the ground, and all the passengers got what they wanted. The woman didn't have to move, the woman didn't have to talk to the guy got his own seat. Now, people have said, what would happen if, ... You know it's always going to be fun when that happens, but what would happen if it were someone that didn't want to sit beside a gay passenger? Or what would happen if it was white supremacists that didn't want to sit beside a black passenger? What would happen if it was a dog lover that didn't want to sit beside a cat lover? I would assume the same thing. If I were on a plane, and I've traveled a fair bit and never seen any of these issues before, but if I were on a plane and someone in front of me was saying, look, I'm not going to sit beside a black person, I would happily trade my seat with that person. And I would say to the black person, I'm sorry, you don't need to deal with that, and you don't need to deal with this. I would like to sit beside you so that you don't need to deal with having to be with a racist. Now, if the person declined my offer, then great. and they have that choice. What the flight attendant did is they looked around. Most people, when they're on a plane, especially if they're going to a city like Toronto and you're probably leaving New York, most people are probably thinking, hey, I just want to get this over with. So someone's like, yeah, I'll move. It becomes a non-issue, and we carry on with our way. So I don't know why Porter has to apologize. The only person here who I see is even remotely at fault is the Jewish man that started this. But given the fact that he's probably a bit, indifferent as to what other people think about his religious views anyway, since he does represent a pretty niche religion when you're dealing with ultra-Orthodox Judaism, I think most people are probably in a place where they're saying, well, I guess he can believe what he wants. If no one was prepared to switch, then maybe the airline would have had to make some even tougher decisions. I mean, that would have been really interesting to see if no one would have switched and their options are either ground the plane until everyone gets along or kick the guy off. Then you'd have a more interesting story, certainly. In fact, I'd probably watch that movie. But no, in this case, everyone was okay moving. So problem solved, crisis averted. Except not. Because it's like we were talking about earlier, where it's not enough to get your way. It's not enough to get what you want. It's not enough to get the thing that you've been fighting for. You want to get it in a certain way. You want to get it in a way that lets you dance up and down off the backs of other people and say, I have emerged victorious. And not only is that so incredibly unrealistic, but I think it also sets people up for failure a lot. Because we forget that, hey, in life, compromise is necessary. You don't want to sit beside a woman. I don't want to sit beside a jerk. I guess we have to change. Oh, no. Now you must feel vindicated because you got it. Oh, well, at least I know that I still am a good person and you're not. And we're all flying to Toronto on Porter and we're going to get unlimited alcohol, which is what Porter gives you on flights, I'm told. Great. What else needs to happen there? What else needs to happen that apparently is so wrong about the exchange that I just outlined? Because I don't get it. So it'll really be interesting to see what comes of this case, because as of this time, Porter has not apologized. Porter has said, look, the situation happened. One of the things that's really interesting about the spokesperson is that he said that he didn't even know it was really a big issue. He said, he thought because the flight attendant dealt with it, that was it. It was over. He didn't really understand why this had to be addressed further. Now, the flight attendant asked other passengers if they would assist. Some agreed to move. So what the spokesperson said is, quote, it was not perceived to be a particularly contentious situation by the flight attendant. And she's even made the comparison of, what would have happened if I were gay and someone was a homophobe and didn't want to sit beside me? Well, probably the same thing. People might silently judge. People might shake their heads. People might and probably will think that the person is wrong for having that belief or perhaps outdated or adhering to an antiquated set of values. But ultimately, if you're on a plane, you just want to get up and go. I mean, I've been delayed on planes so many times. I couldn't care less about people's religious beliefs. Don't blow the plane up and don't delay me. That's it. That's all I care about, really. And get me there in one piece. And the line where she really loses me, she loses me at a couple of points here, is her statement that not only is it ridiculous, but she says, I should not have to move because someone has a problem with my uterus. Yes, it's only a matter of time in these feminist discussions before someone brings in the coveted uterus. I can assure you no one has a problem with your uterus, ma'am. Some people just have religious beliefs that are different than you. That doesn't mean you have to adhere to them. That doesn't mean that you have to be the ones or be the one to say, yes, I agree. I don't buy into it at all. I'm going to get up and move, but it means that you'll be given that option. And if you don't want to take it, then you don't have to. So what I find to be really interesting about this case in particular is that, and I know I alluded to this earlier, but if you were to take even for a second the religion out of the equation and replace it with another one, replace it with Islam, you're going to see a dramatically different case. You're going to see people that will not touch this with a 20-foot pole. And you're going to see a number of people, a huge number of people, that all of a sudden it's going to be like that Seinfeld episode, not that there's anything wrong with it. Oh, well, who am I to say, maybe, I don't know, maybe, blah, blah, this incoherent rambling from people because they don't want to attack that one group that has been deemed to have more rights than others, that one group whose right to be offended has apparently and somehow elevated to a point where it's going to be easier to defend than other people in different faiths, different religions who make the same requests. And this is where I have to just roll my eyes, because you know what? This is the hypocrisy of the rights activists. I mean, you create these groups that are so-called special groups that have all of these special human rights classifications, and eventually they're going to conflict. I mean, if we look at the Christian Baker gay wedding cake scenario that seems to be rearing its head in time and time again. Well, let's not forget that Islam has a fundamental moral objection to homosexuality as well. I mean, so much so that in countries with Muslim governments, gays are often, paraded down the streets and executed. Now, what happens when there is a Muslim baker in a gay wedding cake? I know my friend Stephen Crowder, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, was talking about that recently in a video where he actually did it. Pretended to be a gay person, went into Muslim bakeries. The response was quite shocking, yet somehow these groups don't need to fear the lawsuit. Somehow these groups don't need to be worried, because the rights Gestapo are not going to come after them because, they have protected status as well, so they're fine. You guys are good. You're okay. You don't need to worry about it. It's just the rest of us that do. So look, if you're on a plane and someone wants to switch seats with you and you don't want to switch, say no. And if they find someone else to switch with them and it works, great. End of story. You fly. Everything's fine. Quit your darn whining. We've got to take a break here. When we come back on Lawton Online, going to be talking about another group of whiny ones, talking about these made-up rights, talking about the Free the Nipple movement, and 3 girls in Kitchener-Waterloo that apparently think being topless is the biggest way they can express their feminism. Well, men approve. That's coming up in just a couple of moments on Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media.
So before I get to this next topic that I mentioned a couple of moments ago, I wanted to take a couple of minutes of a break here and play something for you that I came across this week that I must say has given me a new level of appreciation for the way things work in the good old US of A from time to time. So this is an audio clip of a Crime Stoppers video in the town of St. Lundy's, which is, I believe, in Alabama, if I'm not mistaken. And there was a felony that took place on the weekend, and it was something that hit the town hard. They went after and broke into and stole stuff from a small-town diner, and, well, it seemed that no one was more upset than one of the members of the police force in St. Lundy's, a man by the name of Lieutenant Higgins, who made a personal appeal. I'm actually going to say it was a personal warning to the criminal in this Crime Stoppers ad, which has now received over 1.5 million views on Facebook. Here's the clip of Lieutenant Higgins.
On Wednesday night, July the 8th, Stelly's Market and Restaurant on Highway 71 was broken into and burglarized. The thief smashed the front glass with a large rock, kicked in the office door, and made off with hundreds of dollars in cash. Watch as a man commits his crime. Look at him close. The hooded jacket he's wearing is camouflage. He appears to be light-skinned or white, and he looks to be around 6 foot tall and thin. Watch how he walks, with sort of a lanky gait. Stelly's has been a local favorite for decades. The family works hard and is known to be generous. Always with a kind word for friend or stranger, the Stelly family represents Southern hospitality at its best. If you're the man that committed this felony, look at me, son. I'm talking to you. The sheriff likes Stelly's restaurant, and so do I. The food here is good, and the folks are friendly. We're going to identify you, arrest you, and put you in a small cell. After that, I'm going to have a cheeseburger here with fries and a Coke, and leave a nice tip for the waitress. Meanwhile, Your next meal will be served through a small hole in a cell door because our detectives harvested DNA from the rock you used and you left a perfect boot print on the door you kicked in. But we won't have to wait on lab results because you're on St. Landry Crime Stoppers tonight. Congratulations, son. I'm about to make you famous. By tomorrow, 100,000 people will have watched you commit a felony. You will be recognized. And the people that know you don't really like you anyway. So when it comes down to a choice between you and $1,000, they'll take the cash. On behalf of Crime Stoppers, I'm Lieutenant Higgins.
Oh, Lieutenant Higgins, why can you not run for president instead of Donald Trump? I would much rather listen to you talk than I would him. I apologize to the people of St. Landry's, not St. Lundy's, as I mentioned earlier, St. Landry's. Either way, they've got a pretty badass protection detail in terms of their policing. You can find the full YouTube video up there if you look up Lieutenant Higgins Crime Stoppers video on YouTube. Because, well, just slow clap for the lieutenant. There we go. We now return you to your regularly scheduled program. So I mentioned earlier, this is another story that has to do with police, although not nearly any as cool as the old lieutenant there. And it was a run-in that 3 feminists dealt with in Kitchener-Waterloo area, specifically the Waterloo side, which is a town in Ontario, if you're a city in Ontario, I guess, if you're not from the area, where on Friday night they were driving their bikes around topless, as all women do at some point in the day. They're all 3 sisters. They're all in their 20s. One of them is a Juno-nominated Canadian soul singer, so, take from that what you will. And they were riding their bikes around. It was 26-degree heat. And they passed by a police officer who did a U-turn, pulled them over, and told them to put their shirts back on. They said they didn't have to. He said they did. They said they didn't have to, and then the one sister started video recording. Now, this is where things get a bit interesting, because the video does nothing to substantiate the girl's claim, which is that the police were saying that they should be ashamed of their bodies. The video's on. And in the video, it says, the one sister says, why are you pulling us over? The constable says, do you all have working lights and horns? The girl says, yes. She rings the bell. They have the lights on. She said, but that isn't why you pulled us over. You said we were topless and weren't allowed to be, but legally we have that right. The officer says, no, I didn't. Then they say, yes, you did. We have a cop lying to her face right now. The officer says, do you all have working lights and bells or not? They say, yes, we all do. He then drives away. Now, they say that he only changed his line of questioning and changed his tone when he realized that they were video recording. So I don't know why they released the video that doesn't at all substantiate what they've said happened. But it's funny because this is part of what's been a long string in the last however many weeks and months now of people trying to use toplessness as some sort of mechanism to enact, feminism and feminist ideals and combat inequality because, fighting for something that's already been legal for, 20 plus years is a really good investment of your time. I mean, there was that case in Guelph a few weeks ago where an 8-year-old girl at the pool was told to put a top on. There was a case in my town in London, Ontario, a couple of weekends ago where a girl staged a nipple party. Because she wanted people to show up to a festival topless. And, in a city of, almost 400,000 people, she got 7 girls to take their tops off. And, well, none were really the ones you'd want to. And we've seen other examples as well. There was a case in Vancouver this week where a girl said the RCMP told her she should cover up, and now she's staging her own demonstration. So the Waterloo people are holding a rally of some sort, which I find to be really interesting. And a few people have pointed out that maybe the Juno-nominated singer is looking to drum up a little bit of publicity for, whatever her next album is. And that may well be the case. And in fact, I've read this story time and time again, and I've forgotten her name already. I mean, that's how insignificant she is in the grand scheme of things. But it's just this belief that apparently fighting against the sexualization of the female body is something you do by, I don't know, showing people your breasts. I don't get that. I mean, bodies in general are sexualized. Not just female bodies, men's bodies as well. They're sexualized because we are human beings, and human beings are sexual creatures. I think that's a reality that you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone able to combat. But the problem is now that there is supposed to be a level of shame or guilt attached to finding someone beautiful. There's a difference between looking at something and saying, yes, I enjoy that, that's quite pleasing, and for lack of a better term, coveting it. And basically claiming that you have some level of ownership over it. I mean, look, I see lots of cars on the road all the time where I'm like, wow, that's a nice car. Am I objectifying the car? No. Am I disrespecting the car? No, quite the contrary. I'm saying I want to be inside that. Okay, maybe I just went off the rails with that the second I used that word. But the reality is that I don't buy how people can say that we are disrespecting women or being misogynistic by nature by saying that, oh, yes, breasts are attractive. Women have the right in Ontario and in other parts of Canada to walk around topless, yet they don't. Do you know why? Because women see it as different as well. Women see it as something different as well. It's not just this, well, men can do it, why can women not do it? And I don't know what the difference is. I don't know why fundamentally they're different. Maybe it's the biology. Because you know what? The sheer biology of it has made it different. I mean, women develop breasts in a way that men don't. I mean, I've got, bigger boobs than women in half the world, but that's, something that I need to contend with, not anyone else's problem. But no, it's, again, someone trying to make up a right that ostensibly and objectively does not exist. We got to take a break here. When we come back, more Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. Stay tuned.
Or It Must Be a Liberal, only on Lawton Online. Scouring every corner of the globe for stories so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved.
Yes, it's time for It Must Be a Liberal, from corner of the globe to corner of the globe, from Saskatchewan to Sierra Leone, finding the stories so outrageous there must be a liberal involved. And today we actually go to Massachusetts, where George Similaris, a selectman, which is basically a town councillor in Billerica, Massachusetts, a town about 25 miles from Boston, said he was tired of constituents asking when the white paint on the town's sidewalks would be freshened up. Apparently this is a big issue in the town of Billerica, Massachusetts, so he decided he would take matters into his own hands. Went out and bought a bunch of cans of green paint, which is the town's official color, and spent the weekend painting over 6 faded crosswalks. He says all he heard for months was, when is this going to get done? He said he got sick of it. Well, unfortunately, the town bureaucrats didn't like it. The town manager had him charged criminally, not just as a bylaw, but actually charged criminally for his efforts, and also had to pay $4,000 for the cost of cleaning up the paint. The city manager said his job is to uphold the laws, not to break them. He said, look, I'm just trying to do right by the people of my town. I think the award goes not to the town councillor that went to actually do the work of his constituents, but to the bureaucrats that are charging a man criminally for having their work done for them. It's safe to say if you're going to do that, you must be a liberal. There's no other way. Friends, we got to wrap things up for the program today. We will talk to you next week with more of the best of irreverence and political correctness here on Lawton Online. I'm Andrew Lawton. This is TheRebel.media.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out TheRebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.